Funny thing, most people spend their whole lives running from themselves. They wander into relationships the same way a tired traveler walks into a crowded marketplace. Not because they truly want what's being sold there, but because they're terrified of being left alone with their own thoughts. But I want to begin this conversation with a small paradox, a little Zen riddle you might enjoy. If you cannot sit peacefully with yourself for an evening, why should another soul be asked to sit with you for a lifetime? Staying single is not a rejection of love. It is an invitation to meet the one person you've ignored the longest, yourself. Most people think solitude is some kind of punishment, a cold, empty room where no laughter echoes. But if you listen closely, and I mean really listen, you'll discover that the silence is not silent at all. There's a hum beneath it, like the quiet vibration of the universe breathing. And that hum is you. You see, before you can truly love anyone, you must first understand the strange creature that lives inside your own chest. And that understanding rarely comes in the midst of noise. I once said, you are a function of this universe, just as a wave is a function of the ocean. And if that's true, then solitude is simply your tide pulling inward, asking you to discover where the wave ends and the deep sea begins. Spiritually awake people, the ones who have tasted even a drop of this mystery, realize something profound. Most relationships are not about love at all. They are agreements of mutual distraction. Oh, you distract me from me, and I will distract you from you. What a charming little deal, but it keeps us asleep. To remain single intentionally is to refuse that bargain. It is to say, I will not use another person as a shield against myself. It is not loneliness, it is not avoidance, it is courage, it is clarity, it is the gentle, sacred work of remembering who you are before you attach yourself to who someone else wants you to be. And so the journey begins here in the quiet room where you finally sit down with yourself and whisper, I'm listening. There's a certain freedom, subtle, almost invisible, that only reveals itself when you stop looking for someone to complete you. You see, most people walk through life carrying a quiet hunger, a sort of spiritual ache that whispers, find someone and maybe you'll feel whole. But a spiritually awake person, one who has gazed honestly into the mirror of their own mind, discovers a surprising truth. Wholeness was never missing, it was simply buried beneath noise. When you remain single by wisdom rather than circumstance, you begin to notice something curious. You no longer enter a room scanning faces for someone who might fill an inner emptiness. You begin walking through life differently, lightly, as if your soul finally remembered that it was not designed to cling. And in that lightness, another truth surfaces. When you stop clutching, the world stops slipping. This isn't selfishness, it's sovereignty. Imagine a tree trying to grow roots while someone keeps pulling at its branches. How can it stand tall? How can it reach the sun? A spiritually awake person knows that anchoring oneself requires seasons of aloneness, not as isolation, but as grounding. And so they choose to stay single. Not because they don't care about love, but because they care too much to enter it half awake. They understand that love is not a remedy. It is a meeting of two beings already rooted, already whole. Anything less becomes dependency. To be free, you must let go of the idea that someone else holds your happiness. And so the awakened let go not of people, but of the illusion that happiness lives outside of themselves. In that letting go, they find a quiet liberation, a soft unfolding, a freedom so gentle that only those unafraid of solitude ever truly feel it. It's an odd thing, isn't it? We spend years learning the faces of others, their moods, their sensitivities, their histories, yet so few people ever take the time to learn the face behind their own eyes. When you choose to remain single intentionally, you eventually encounter someone unexpected, someone you've passed in every mirror but never truly greeted. Your inner stranger, that quiet presence within you, the one whose voice you drowned beneath opinions, obligations, and the endless chatter of trying to be someone for someone else. Most people avoid this inner meeting with a kind of delicate fear. They worry that if they sit long enough with themselves, they might discover something uncomfortable, a longing, a wound, a dream they abandoned, or a truth too heavy to ignore. But spiritually awake individuals know a secret. The parts of yourself you fear the most are often the ones holding the key to your freedom. Solitude becomes the gentle doorway to this discovery. In the quiet, You begin to notice the subtleties, the way your thoughts rise like small ripples across a lake, the way your breath stretches into forgotten corners of your chest, the way the heart softens when no one is demanding anything from it. You realize that the inner stranger wasn't dangerous at all, just neglected. And in this reunion, you start to see your own patterns with remarkable clarity. Why you loved the way you did, why you chased certain people, why you ran from others, why you accepted less than you deserved, not with judgment, but with tender understanding. Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. A paradox, yes, but in the stillness of singleness, you learn to stop defining and begin observing. You discover the quiet humor in your own mind, the subtle wisdom beneath your fears, the small forgotten joys that were overshadowed by the need to be someone for others. And in that moment when you finally sit with your inner stranger and feel no urgency to escape, you realize this gentle self-meeting is the beginning of awakening. There's a kind of silence you can only hear when no one is standing beside you. Not the ordinary silence that fills empty rooms, but a more ancient one. A silence with texture, with depth, as if the whole universe has paused just long enough for you to notice its breathing. Most people try to escape this silence. They turn on music, call a friend, all to avoid the delicate echo of their own mind. But spiritually awake people, those who've grown comfortable in their solitude, treat silence as a mentor. For in silence you discover that your thoughts are not enemies, but clouds passing through a wide open sky. You begin to see them drift and dissolve without needing to chase or fight them. And then something subtle happens. A kind of inner spaciousness appears, a field of awareness untouched by noise or story, a calm clarity that says, you don't need to hold anything, let it move. I often said muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. This is not simply advice, it is a spiritual law. When you're single, truly single in spirit, not waiting for someone to rescue your evenings or fill your silence, you learn to let the muddy water of your mind settle. You stop stirring it with unnecessary desires. You allow clarity to rise on its own. And in that clarity, you see things you were never able to see before, subtle truths about yourself, hidden tensions you carried, dreams you postponed, wounds you pretended were healed. Silence becomes a mirror that shows you what your busy life kept concealed, not to punish you, but to free you. Because once you see yourself clearly, you no longer cling to relationships out of confusion. You no longer beg for affection because you no longer misunderstand your own worth. You don't get pulled into emotional storms created by unmet expectations. The awakened remain single for seasons, sometimes long ones, because silence gives them something no relationship can grant. The ability to hear life without distortion. And once you hear that clarity, once you taste that inner stillness, you realize that silence was never empty at all. It was waiting for you. One of the quiet miracles of staying single, truly single in the spiritual sense, is that life suddenly stops feeling like a performance. You know how it goes. When we step into relationships without understanding ourselves, we unconsciously slip into roles: the agreeable one, the dependable one, the strong one, the one who never says no, the one who keeps the peace even when their heart trembles. These roles form slowly, silently, like dust gathering in the corners of a house you no longer notice. But when you spend time alone, when your evenings belong only to your own presence, something refreshing happens. You drop the roles. Not because you try to, but because there's no audience to perform for. You wake up in the morning and realize you don't have to act like the person someone else assumes you are. You don't need to soften your truth to keep someone comfortable. You don't need to dim your inner fire to avoid being too much. We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. And relationships entered unconsciously can amplify this illusion. You become a character in someone else's script without noticing the pen in their hand. But solitude hands your pen back. You begin rewriting yourself in your own handwriting. You laugh differently, more honestly, more deeply. You speak differently, not to persuade, but to express. You move differently, without the stiffness that comes from trying to be liked. You become, slowly and beautifully, your unedited self. This freedom is subtle, yet it changes everything. It awakens a kind of authenticity that cannot exist when you're busy bending your soul to fit into shapes that please others. A spiritually awake person chooses singleness because they refuse to become a costume. They want love, yes, but only the kind that allows them to remain fully themselves. And so in the quiet season of not performing, you rediscover your own cadence, your own laughter, your own truth, the very things that get lost when you spend too long trying to be who others expect you to be. There comes a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when a spiritually awake person simply stops running. Not because they've grown tired, but because they finally understand what they were chasing was never ahead of them. It was within them. You see, the world teaches us that somewhere out there is the one, a perfect match who will arrive like a final chapter, completing us in some grand romantic equation. But here's the curious twist. When you wake up spiritually, you realize there is no one waiting in the distance. There is only the one who is already here, you. This realization doesn't make life lonely, it makes it honest. For most people, the search for the one is not a search for love, it is a search for escape. Escape from emptiness, from boredom, from their own mind. But when you've sat with yourself long enough, when you've walked through your own thoughts without fear or distraction, you no longer need an escape route. Your heart becomes spacious enough to hold its own storms. And so the awakened stop chasing, not out of cynicism, but out of clarity. I once said, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple, and this applies to love as well. When you stop hunting for it, love ceases to be a quest and returns to being a presence. A spiritually awake person does not seek someone to fill their silence or paint over their cracks. They do not roam the world with an empty cup asking others to fill it. Instead, they shape a life so rich, so deeply rooted in their own being, that love becomes something they can offer rather than something they beg for. They understand a profound paradox. When you chase someone, you run away from yourself. When you return to yourself, the right people find you effortlessly. And so they remain single, not as a rejection of romance, but as a celebration of wholeness. They are not waiting, they are becoming. The one they were searching for was never a person on the horizon, but the depth, the peace, and the completeness that emerges when they stop chasing anyone and come home to themselves. One of the hidden gifts of staying single, something almost mystical in its quiet power, is the sharpening of what you might call your inner compass. Everyone is born with one, but most people never learn to use it. They navigate life using borrowed maps, family expectations, cultural pressures, the opinions of friends, the fear of disappointing someone they love. And so their direction in life is rarely their own. But when you spend time alone, when you are no longer orbiting someone else's desires, something beautiful begins to happen. Your inner compass wakes up. It begins with a simple feeling, a subtle tug inside your chest that says yes or no long before your mind begins its analysis. You start recognizing what truly resonates with your spirit, what nourishes you, what drains you, what aligns with your path, and what pulls you away from it. In a relationship built unconsciously, your compass grows faint. Its needle trembles as it tries to point you toward your own truth, while you keep turning it towards someone else's needs. But in solitude, the needle steadies. I often said, the only Zen you find on the tops of mountains is the Zen you bring with you. Your inner compass is the same. It never abandons you. It simply becomes easier to hear when no one else is speaking over it. Staying single for a season creates the silence needed for you to distinguish between what you truly want and what you were taught to want. And that distinction is what transforms a wandering soul into a guided one. You find yourself making decisions that feel strangely natural, as if life is speaking through you. You begin saying no without guilt and yes with full conviction, not because someone else approves, but because your inner compass is finally pointing you toward a life that feels authentically yours. This is why spiritually awake people often embrace long periods of solitude, not out of isolation, but out of alignment. They are learning the language of their own direction. And once that compass becomes clear, they stop drifting through life and start moving like someone who finally remembers the way home. There's something beautifully unhurried about a person who has woken up to themselves. You can see it in their eyes, a softness, a quiet patience, as if they've learned that life's most meaningful experiences cannot be chased, demanded, or forced. Most people rush into love the way one runs into a storm, hoping to find shelter, hoping the chaos outside will somehow calm the chaos inside. But spiritually awake individuals move differently. They understand a delicate truth. Anything rushed becomes fragile. Anything forced becomes hollow. And so they take their time. Not out of fear of intimacy, but out of respect for it. They've learned that love entered prematurely can become a cage, a tangle of misunderstandings, or a place where two half-formed people ask each other for completion neither can give. Instead, the awakened allow love to unfold the way a sunrise does, naturally, gradually, without urgency. Life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived. Love follows the same law. It is not a task, it is not a race, it is not an achievement for the world to applaud. Love is a season, and seasons arrive in their own timing. When you've spent time alone, truly alone, you learn to trust these natural rhythms. You see how relationships shaped by haste become filled with expectations, demands, and pressures that suffocate the very mystery that makes love beautiful. The spiritually awake refuse to let this happen. They would rather sit by themselves on a quiet evening, listening to the gentle hum of their own thoughts, than sprint into a connection that asks them to abandon their inner unfolding. This patience is not passivity, it's wisdom. Because when someone finally does arrive, not out of need, but resonance, the connection becomes something deeper than romance alone. It becomes companionship of spirit, a joining of two beings who are already complete as individuals. And so they do not rush, they breathe, they grow, they allow. For the awakened know, love that arrives slowly is the love that stays. You know, there's something I want to tell you directly because it's often misunderstood. Choosing to stay single for a while doesn't mean you're shutting the door to love forever. No, not at all. It simply means you're learning the art of entering connection without misplacing yourself on the way in. Most people, when they fall in love, they slip out of themselves like a coat and drape it over the nearest chair. They forget their boundaries, their dreams, their inner voice, all in the hope that the other person will stay. But that's not love, that's self-abandonment wearing a romantic mask. And so, I'll tell you a little secret. Lean in for this one. Real love never asks you to shrink. It invites you to expand. Spiritually awake people understand this. You can see it in how they speak, how they laugh, how gently they carry their own presence. They're not avoiding intimacy. No, they're preserving themselves so that when intimacy does arrive, they can meet it with their whole being, not the leftover fragments of someone who bent too far. I often said, never pretend to a love which you do not actually feel, for love is not ours to command. And that applies here too. You cannot fake wholeness. You cannot rush into connection hoping it will glue your pieces together. It won't. Only you can do that in silence, in reflection, in solitude. And once you've done that work, once you've shaped a self you genuinely enjoy living inside, connection becomes something very different. It's no longer a lifeboat, it's no longer a hiding place, it's a meeting point. Two complete worlds sharing their galaxies for a while, and you know what happens then? There's no fear of losing yourself, because you're not entering the relationship with empty hands. You bring your own life to the table, your clarity, your joys, your inner compass, and love becomes a celebration of two freedoms, not the merging of two insecurities. So yes, the awakened stay single for long seasons, but not because they fear commitment. It's because they want to meet another person as a whole human being, not a question mark looking for completion. And when you connect from that place, my friends, that is when love becomes art. And now, my friends, we come to the heart of it all, the quiet revelation behind this entire journey. You see, the real treasure of staying single for a season is not independence, not confidence, not resilience, though you discover all of those along the way. No, the real treasure is that you finally stop fearing your own company. That is the moment of awakening, when you can sit with yourself on a long, quiet evening with no distraction, no urgency, no reaching for someone else to fill the silence, and you feel at home. That right there is the beginning of inner freedom. Most people are not afraid of being alone. They're afraid of meeting the person waiting for them in the silence. They're afraid of the truths they haven't faced, the desires they've suppressed, the wounds they've buried, and the dreams they've postponed. But once you've walked through that inner landscape, once you've made peace with the stranger inside, something extraordinary happens. You discover you were never incomplete to begin with. And when that realization dawns, when it finally settles into your bones, love transforms. It stops being a search and becomes a sharing. It stops being a rescue mission and becomes a dance. It stops being a hunger and becomes a generosity. I once said, you do not look out there for God, something in the sky. You look in. Love works the same way. You do not hunt for it. You uncover it within yourself. And when you no longer fear being alone, you no longer cling, grasp, beg, demand, or compromise yourself. You don't enter relationships out of need. You enter them out of abundance. You become the kind of person who can stand beside another without leaning on them for balance. The awakened ones stay single until they reach this place, a place where their heart is not seeking a home, but offering one. And when love arrives, as it always does in its own rhythm, it doesn't disrupt their peace. It harmonizes with it. So if you find yourself walking alone for a while, don't rush the journey, don't fear the quiet, don't chase the noise, for in the silence, you are not waiting for love. You are becoming someone who can finally receive it without losing yourself. And that, my friends, is the smartest thing a spiritually awake human being can ever do.